U.S. backs UAE oil executive as president of UN Climate Summit. U.S. suicide hotline gets 1.7 million calls, texts, and emails in first 5 months. Illinoisans celebrate second annual Muhammad Ali Day. Taliban tell OIC not to interfere in its internal affairs. Hindutva Watch founder reveals himself to Washington Post. 2022 deadliest in 7 years for Palestinians. From our Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. Our top story tonight. U.S. climate envoy John Kerry supported the selection of Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber as president of the United Nations Climate Summit. The UAE named Al-Jaber president of the 28th United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or COP28, which will be held in November, Common Dreams reports. Al-Jaber is CEO of the United Arab Emirates state-run oil company. He heads the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, or ADNOC, and a renewable energy firm, in which ADNOC holds a 24% stake. Progressive lawmakers on Monday expressed outrage and disbelief on his selection because the UAE plans to expand its oil production. The country is expected to become the third largest expander of oil and gas production between 2023 and 2025. Kerry told the Associated Press scientists and advocates have known for decades that policymakers must lead a rapid transition away from oil and gas-generated energy. He added that the leadership of the UAE is committed to transitioning. 10 leading U.S. economic advocacy groups on Monday launched a campaign calling for a federally subsidized jobs program targeting communities with high unemployment. The Full Employment for All campaign was timed to coincide with Martin Luther King Jr. Day yesterday and the 60th anniversary of King's 1963 I Have a Dream speech. King's indictments of U.S. capitalism and militarism are often overlooked, omitted, or overshadowed by his civil rights work. The purpose of the August 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom has been eclipsed by the iconic speech he delivered there. A year before his April 1968 assassination, King wrote, "We must create full employment or we must create incomes." The recently rolled out 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline took in 1.7 million calls, texts, and chats within 5 months of its establishment, National Public Radio reports. The hotline has been flooded by messages across the country from those contemplating suicide or dealing with a mental health issue. It operates 24/7, connecting counselors with those in need. The federal government invested $1 billion in the lifeline, $500 million of which was included in the most recent federal spending bill passed by Congress. The 988 number had been a more traditional 7-digit number. It was shortened to 3 digits to be faster to dial in a crisis and more memorable. The abbreviated version is akin to 911, the emergency number to call for police assistance. The Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, is saying a professor showing a portrait of the Prophet Muhammad during an art history class was not Islamophobic. Adjunct Professor Erica Lopez Prater was fired from her position for showing the 14th century painting in her global art history class. CAIR is urging Hamline University to re-examine the decision. The advocacy organization said on Friday it strongly discourages showing visual depictions of the Prophet, but the group draws a distinction between professors who analyze ancient paintings for academic purposes and people who use them to cause offense. CAIR said, "What we find un-Islamic is not necessarily Islamophobic," and cautioned people must distinguish between those two concepts. Republican Representative Rick Allen of Georgia suggested last week he would support raising the Social Security retirement age. That policy change would slash benefits across the board. Allen said he supported the move because people have approached him and said they actually want to work longer. He said, "We're not going to cut Social Security," when confronted by an advocate in the Capitol. But he later contradicted himself by expressing support for raising the retirement age. Allen is a member of the Republican Study Committee. The House panel released a policy agenda last year calling for gradually raising the retirement age from 67 to 70. Olympic fencer Ibtihaj Muhammad visited Islamic Foundation School and Mosque in Villa Park, Illinois last week. She spoke before the school's 550 students, as well as parents, employees, and community members. The 2016 Olympic bronze medalist in saber fencing also did a book signing of her children's titles, The Proudest Blue and The Kindest Red. Muhammad is the first Muslim American woman to wear a hijab while competing for the United States in the Olympics. Islamic Foundation School Principal Farhad Siddiqui told the Daily Herald inviting Muhammad to talk was part of the school leadership's efforts to promote literacy and reading. She added Muhammad's story of overcoming challenges and biases to excel in her profession was inspiring to students. Illinoisans celebrate the second annual Muhammad Ali Day. Details after the break, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. Illinois held its second observance of Muhammad Ali Day today. The holiday was established through the Muslim Civic Coalition's efforts last year. The state legislature passed a resolution celebrating his legacy as a world heavyweight boxing champion and his work for civic justice, the Daily Herald reported. To commemorate the day, the coalition hosted a free screening of the documentary Ali's Comeback, The Untold Story at the DuSable Black History Museum in Chicago. The film tells the story of Ali's exile from boxing due to his stance against the Vietnam War and the people who supported him to ensure he received a fair fight. Maria Muzaffar, the Muslim Civic Coalition's Director of Advocacy and Policy, said Muhammad Ali Day was established for children to see an example of hard work, conviction, and sometimes lonely patriotism. Nearly 1 billion people worldwide are served by healthcare facilities lacking a reliable electricity supply, a report published Saturday revealed. That is close to the entire populations of the U.S., Indonesia, Pakistan, and Germany combined, according to the document. The report was prepared by the World Health Organization, the World Bank, the International Renewable Energy Agency, and Sustainable Energy for All. Access to electricity is critical for providing quality healthcare or offering life-saving immunization. However, 1 in 8 people in the world lacks access to health coverage, the report said. Without reliable electricity in all healthcare facilities, universal health coverage cannot be reached, the report said. The Taliban have welcomed the Organization of Islamic Cooperation's recent meeting and declaration on Afghanistan. The Saudi Arabia-based OIC is composed of 57 countries, 48 of which are Muslim-majority nations. On Wednesday, its delegation met with the Taliban to voice concern over restrictions imposed by the Taliban-led government on Afghan women. These include widespread bans on education and employment. The OIC stressed the Islamic stance on women's rights to education and employment. However, it also asked the international community not to interfere in Afghanistan's internal affairs. Taliban spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid said the international community should continue its cooperation with Afghans. The regime seized power in the country in August 2021 after America's withdrawal following a 20-year U.S.-led war. The Taliban has also called on all international organizations, especially the OIC, to have a close understanding with Kabul. With 230 fatalities, 2022 was the deadliest in 7 years for Palestinians. The violence will continue to escalate as 13 Palestinians, including 3 children, have already been killed this year, Palestinian ambassador to Turkey, Fayed Mustafa said. Mustafa said 171 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank last year and 59 in the Gaza Strip. Over 9,000 Palestinians were injured by the Israeli army and settlers, and more than 6,500 Palestinians were detained, including around 5,000 people still languishing in Israeli prisons, he added. Mustafa also said that there were more than 262 incursions at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Islam's third holiest mosque, by 48,000 Jewish extremists protected by Israeli forces. On Monday, human rights activist news agency released statistics on the number of deaths and arrests of anti-government protesters in Iran. Since September 2022, over 500 protesters, including 70 children, have been killed. Authorities have arrested more than 19,000 people. Of those detained, 168 are children and 110 are under impending threat of a death sentence. 4 protesters have already been executed. Human Rights Watch reported authorities have used various weapons, including assault rifles, on protesters. Those detained have been subjected to torture, mistreatment, and sexual harassment. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, said the executions violate international human rights and labeled the trials fundamentally unfair. Anti-government protests continue in Iran over 22-year-old Mahsa Amini's death in police custody in September 2022. Raqib Hamid Naik, a Kashmiri Muslim journalist hiding in America, leads a secret life in the shadows. Naik is safe from the Indian government and far from the death threats and late-night knocks on his parents' door. He has been working on a scrappy secret data project to track hate crimes in India, but to grow it, he needed to go public. The 29-year-old is the founder of HindutvaWatch.org. The site provides one of the strongest real-time data sets of human rights abuses in the world's largest democracy. The site uses video and picture evidence submitted by a network of Indian activists, along with news aggregation. It then tracks hate crimes by Hindu extremists against Muslims, Christians, and members of the lower castes. Since it was founded in April 2021, the site has cataloged more than 1,000 instances of violent attacks and rhetoric. Rights groups and Uyghurs living abroad strongly condemned a visit to far western China this week by a delegation of Muslim scholars and clerics. The delegation voiced support for China's policies in East Turkestan, which the Chinese government refers to as Xinjiang. The group of more than 30 Muslim representatives from 14 countries arrived on January 8th to visit the cities of Urumqi, Turpan, Altay, and Kashgar. They met with government officials. Among them were representatives of the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Serbia, South Sudan, and Indonesia. But critics say they turned a blind eye to the suffering of persecuted Uyghurs. Ali Rashid al-Nuaimi, head of the delegation, made statements that sparked widespread anger from Uyghurs abroad and a strong reaction from U.S.-based Muslim groups. State media quoted al-Nuaimi praising efforts by Chinese authorities to eliminate terrorism extremism in the region as the right way to protect national interests. Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid, president of American Muslim human rights organization Justice for All, told RFA on Wednesday the visit is part of the Chinese government's effort to cover up its repression of Uyghurs. He said China is on a mission to confuse the Muslim world about what is happening to Uyghurs and other Muslim ethnic groups. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. The Supreme Court is about to eviscerate the right to strike. To discuss this in detail, let's go to Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Over to you, Edward.
Thank you, Samana, and assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Let's dive in. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulullah. Today we're going to be discussing the topic of unions. There's an upcoming Supreme Court case that could significantly impact the right of workers to go on strike, the right of unions to organize and to do what they do best. To discuss the Supreme Court case, what it could mean for the American labor force, in particular the union movement, let's bring on our special guest, Professor Marjorie Cohn. She's a former professor at Thomas Jefferson School of Law and the former president of the National Lawyers Guild, among many other accomplishments. Very happy to have her with us today. Hello, Professor Cohn. How are you?
Good, Edward. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's good to have you back. So first, tell us right now, before we even get into the Supreme Court case, for those of our viewers who may not be very familiar with current federal law, current standards regarding what labor unions can and cannot do, what's just the current lay of the land in terms of the ability of unions, private and federal otherwise, to go on strike? And then we can maybe tell us about this Supreme Court case and how it could impact that right.
Yes, well, the right to strike is a basic right of labor unions and workers, and it is the most potent weapon they have to be treated fairly, to demand to be treated fairly by their employers. And in the United States, there's a federal agency called the National Labor Relations Board. It's an administrative agency, and it is tasked with primary responsibility to determine the rights, collective bargaining rights of workers and unfair labor practices when they are alleged. And so this case has to do with whether or not an employer can make an end run around the National Labor Relations Board, and whether employers can file lawsuits in state court for damages without the National Labor Relations Board, which is the premier agency qualified to do this, weighing in first.
So then what's the legal debate here? What are the challenger, what are the plaintiffs saying? What are the respondents saying? What's the crux of the legal argument here?
Well, this was a strike that the Teamsters Union called because collective bargaining had broken down, and they went on strike against Glacier Northwest, which is a cement factory. It delivers cement to different customers. And when the strike was called, 85 workers went on strike, but about 16 of them had trucks that already had concrete in them, the cement mixing. And so they drove those back to the employer, but were instructed by the union to keep those drums running so that the concrete would not harden and be ruined. But the employer, Glacier Northwest, was unable to salvage that concrete, and they lost some of it, even though the trucks were not damaged. And so Glacier Northwest is suing the union in state court for damages. And then the National Labor Relations Board issued a complaint against Glacier Northwest, saying that they had committed unfair labor practices by retaliating against the union for going on strike, basically. And the question before the Supreme Court is whether or not the employer can go to state court without waiting for a decision from the National Labor Relations Board.
Fascinating. So, Professor Cohn, what do you think the Supreme Court, what are some of the options that could come out of the court? Obviously, there's no telling what they'll do, but based on the makeup of the court, what are your expectations of how they might land, what legal argument they might decide wins the day on this? And then what impact could that have on the labor movement, I should say?
Well, if the employer wins, if the right-wingers on the Supreme Court vote in favor of Glacier Northwest and against the Teamsters, then this could have a chilling effect on the right of workers to strike, because if a union or workers know that if they go on strike, they can be sued in state court for damages, and they'll have to hire expensive lawyers, and it will be financially prohibitive, that will chill them from going on strike. So the question is, the employer here, Glacier Northwest, is arguing that the union knew or should have known that this concrete would be damaged. And the union is saying, no, we explicitly told our drivers to keep those trucks running so that the concrete would not harden. And so then the question is what test they use. Is it a question of what the union intended? Did the union intend to destroy property? Or is this loss of property a byproduct of a strike? When a labor union goes on strike, it is trying to create economic harm to the employer. That is attendant with all strikes. And so the question is what this majority is going to do. The three liberals on the court appeared sympathetic to the union position. Chief Justice John Roberts was kind of trying to have it both ways. And the other four members of the Supreme Court, or five members of the Supreme Court, I should say, did not really tip their hand. But Neil Gorsuch, who asked just a couple of questions, is very much against the so-called administrative state, where specialized agencies like the National Labor Relations Board are charged with protecting health and safety issues. And he would rather just leave it up to courts, which can shop for the most sympathetic court to corporations. So he is likely to vote against the union. I think that's certainly Thomas and Alito will vote against the union. And then the question is what the other right-wingers will do.
So is there any danger to, not just in this case, but to the broader administrative state, as someone would call it, that the court could significantly limit the right of administrative agencies to establish rules and regulations to address these issues like the labor movement, health and safety? Could the ruling go beyond just this one particular case involving this lawsuit? Could there be broader implications for the ability of administrative agencies to do what they've been doing for the past several decades?
That is a real danger. There is what is called, it's well established, it's called Chevron deference, and it requires that when a law is ambiguous, the courts must defer to an agency's reasonable construction of the statute. And even the late Scalia, who was very right-wing, said that administrative agencies are in the best position to know about this and to take the lead. And Neil Gorsuch is trying to do away with Chevron deference. He has said that in a couple of opinions that he's written. And so if this does go against the union and against the National Labor Relations Board in effect, then we could expect to see future Supreme Court decisions perhaps overturning this Chevron deference and saying that we don't have to go through administrative agencies to protect health and safety and civil rights issues. Yes, it will be by the end of June. The most controversial cases are usually handed down at the very end of June, but that's when the current Supreme Court term ends, is the end of June, beginning of July.
Understood. So finally, Professor Cohn, as we look at this particular case, as we look at the organized labor union movement, is there anything labor unions are already starting to put in place in case this goes the way they don't want it to go? Are there any steps they're already considering, thinking of, things they could do to try to make sure they're protecting their movement as best they can?
Well, no, I understand what you're saying. And it could go one way or the other. Labor could become very cautious, decide that they should not launch major strikes because they'll be too expensive, because they could be sued in state court for damages. They could not file unfair labor practice charges against the employer with the National Labor Relations Board, or they could be more proactive and take the offense and engage in community campaigns and get the public all excited about this, and perhaps put some pressure on the administration. Now, the Biden administration has said it's very pro-labor, but interestingly, the Biden administration filed an amicus brief in this case and didn't take sides, but basically looked like they were leaning toward the employers. So, talking out of both sides of their mouths.
Fascinating. Well, that also makes it very interesting. So, Professor Cohn, I want to thank you for coming and sharing these details about the case, and we look forward to having you back to discuss these and other legal issues. And obviously, we'll see what the court decides next summer, God willing. Until then, thank you so much, Professor. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we'll send it back to you, Samana.
Thank you. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.